Thank you so much, Leah. And thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. And I feel like I have been missing out not coming to this meeting. But things happen in your life and you find new meetings and it's a great opportunity. Um, so Katie, alcoholic. My sobriety date is October 7th of 2020. Leah touched on a few things, and I promise none of what she said was rehearsed. Like she got dates down, she got a timeline down, like questionably better than me. But yeah. So with 20 minutes, I'm going to be mindful. I'm also ADHD as well as alcoholism. So I'll do my best here. So to kind of start off where one would the beginning, I grew up in a home that and this is something I bring in when I tell my story just because I do think it's important in the realm of alcoholism. I grew up in a home that my parents loved me, they did the best that they could, but there wasn't a whole lot of love for the expectation I had. Um, and of course, expectations. I went to a meeting last night on expectations and it really hit home. I didn't start drinking until I was 14. And at that point, the isms in hindsight were always there. They were always there. But, when I was 14, I went to this girl's house, this group of girls that I wanted to be friends with so badly. And of course, they had some upperclassmen, and that came over, and I was like, yeah, I'm into this. And I had a beer for the first time, and there was multiple. I didn't get drunk that night, but I do remember, as you'll hear in people's stories or people's shares, I just remember like finally feeling almost at home in my skin for the first time. My mind wasn't completely turned off. I will say that I think in my head, it was like 2 weeks later, was the first time that I had drank liquor and actually blacked out. And I will say this. Oh, I totally forgot to mention, I have a sponsor. She knows she's my sponsor. That's typically how we do this. I say it in the beginning. I don't currently have any sponsees, but I will say I'm open to sponsoring right now. I have taken multiple women through the 12 steps. Um, Sorry, back to it. So I will say this. In the book, it describes different kinds of drinkers, right? And I identify when I read the big book, I identified with every single kind of drinker that it talks about, right? In different seasons of my life. Um, I blacked out when I was still in high school pretty much immediately. And there were definitely consequences there, but I played soccer and I just didn't drink as often as it led into, right? My alcoholism was progressing. So I will say this, when I was 18 years old, I got my first DUI. It got expunged, God, but at that time I was like, oh, I'll push the envelope some more. Because those consequences weren't really setting in. Like, I think a part of me thought I was just lucky. Um, and so I won't really touch on college. I came back home, and because when I was in college, my mom ended up getting evicted. And so it just kind of forced, there was a bunch of things that happened, and I came home. Fortunately for me, I'd already accumulated a fake ID. And honestly, wasn't even trying. Like, as an alcoholic, I'll tell you, I wasn't even trying. It was like this girl gave it to me, and I was like, cool. And I came back home, and all my friends were still off at college, and I was now able to go to the bar with all my friends' older siblings. When I was 14, I entered the service industry. Um, and I'll say this as a preface to everything that I say. None of the things that I list or I tell you about my life are the reason I'm an alcoholic. I have the spiritual malady, I have the physical allergy, I have the mental obsession, I have those things. I've always had them. But I did drink at things when I could give myself the excuse enough. Um, And in the service industry, it, I was in there for about 11 years until the year I got sober, actually. And I drank with everybody. And I just like, I think one of the things for me and why I love YPAW so much is I think it's so hard for people who feel like, oh, well, I haven't had enough time drinking, or, I haven't gotten the divorce yet, or all of these things. It's hard to come in at 18 or 15. I've known people who came in at 15. It's hard when you're younger because you're rationalizing in your head all of these things. um, the service industry was definitely one of those things. Um, and so fast forward, by the time I was 22, 23, I had gotten the DUI, which I will say again, it got expunged, which is an important part of the story in a second. I had had a PI, which again, God, I was behind a car that was on. I hit a curb and I was leaving work, hit a curb, passed out at the wheel. Car was still on. Cops found me. Um, I will say, as a blackout drinker, I did not remember that I got the ticket, which then led me to go to jail when I got pulled over. Um, and so I'd already had those experiences. There was also like, I won't touch on things, but there's things as a woman that I experienced that are a part of my story. And if any woman or man in this has struggled with those things, feel free to reach out to me about anything, but that is a part of my story as well. So I get to 23. I go to jail. My dad, this was 2 weeks before my dad was moving to Carrollton. Oh, so I live in Fort Worth, but I'm from Dallas originally. Um, so my dad was moving to a different part of Dallas, and this was 2 weeks. He had taken away my car and everything. And I remember he gave me this like ultimatum. He's like, you need to go to a meeting. And I had used AA as kind of this excuse or this backup excuse to my dad multiple times at this point. I knew it existed. I had already called central office at some point, and they're like, hey, there's this meeting. But in my head, AA was like a room, a dingy, dingy room, in some basement where there was a lot of older people that I just like wasn't going to be able to relate to. And I will say I have been to a few meetings that kind of do fit that, but that's not an average. And honestly, I have a lot of love for those meetings too. But anyways, that's what I had in my head. So I told my dad that, and then I got drunk and I made a Facebook post, which was like so much ego, like I wanted attention. So I wrote like a paragraph on Facebook, of course. And I was like, it was a cry for help type thing. And this girl that I was dated a guy that I was in the service industry immediately reached out and was like, hey, do you want to go to this meeting? And I was like, and of course, at this point, I had already given her my address. And one thing, if you've been in AA long enough, if you give somebody an address or any like set thing, they're gonna show up. Like I tried to back out and she was at my door. Like, and I had never really talked to this girl before. And so I went to my first meeting in Dallas, which is a young people's meeting called Whiskey and Milk, where I met Leah. Um, and I'll say this, I'll kind of chop up the 6 months that I was in AA for the first time to this. I came into the meeting and I remember hearing somebody talk about self-destruction, and I identified with that, right? Like I still wasn't convinced I had like alcohol was an issue for me. I really I had countless things on a resume of drinking that told me that that was not the truth, but I still was convinced. So I really hung on to this idea, but I did sit and, I listened while kind of figuring out with my ego what I was going to say in the meeting naturally. And I dove into fellowship. I did the meeting after the meeting, and I started the steps, would lie to my sponsor about actually reading the book, and things happen, and I can say this, that, and the other. I started dating a guy that wasn't sober about a month in naturally, and I'll also bring that up later. But anyways, he about 6 months had happened. I was on my fourth step, and I remember telling my sponsor, like, hey, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. And she's like, she referred to the book and the part of the book where it's like, well, if you're not sure, try some controlled drinking. The issue was that I did not factor in what that would look like if the answer was that I am an alcoholic. So naturally, I left a meeting, I stole my dad's vodka and drank half a bottle of vodka as a normal person would do. And then ego kept me out for 2 years. And I say that, because I've tried this program without doing the things that people suggested. There's three sides of the triangle for a reason. And fortunately, and I'll dive into those 2 years really quickly because there are some important points, obviously. Um, but I will say this, my first time drinking gave me basically a blueprint of what I should do the next time. And I'm eternally grateful for that. I do not recommend relapse for anybody, but it is a part of my story. And I don't think I am of the belief that nothing happens in God's world by mistake, only because of this program. So within those 2 years, I'm not really quite sure what is off top or not necessarily appropriate. So I'll choose my words wisely in these 2 years. And I will say this too. I had the experience, I did the thing online as an alcoholic does, where they're like, hey, I'm an alcoholic. And then it gives you like a list of 20. I actually think it's more than that. It gives you a list of 20 things. And I checked all of those boxes, but two. And this is why I mentioned earlier that I bring this back up. It was that I didn't have a DWI and that hadn't lost my job yet. Well, I have already disclosed to you guys that I had a DUI, just got expunged. And the other thing was I worked in the service industry when, and this happened before I first got sober. I drank so much that, and later finding out this was the allergy. My body does not digest alcohol like a normal person that can drink. Like that's just how it is, right? Well, I would come in with withdrawals and I'd be so shaky in the service industry. And I worked these brunch shifts that I swear were, I mean, they at least felt 15 hours long. But I would come in and they would give me tequila shots. My managers, my GM, all my managers would give me tequila shots to stabilize me throughout my shift. Like we were all just kind of knowing, but um anyways, so that was one of those things. So when I left for 2 years, um, I noticed that the alcoholism was in full force, right? There was no stopping. It picked up exactly where it left off. And because of that, to fast forward, I had a medical situation that led me to the doctors, and the doctors did um, some tests on me. And they said to me, this was August of 2020, they told me that if I continue to drink the same way that I already was for 6 more months, that I would have to look up like dialysis centers and things like that. And I knew that they weren't joking or they weren't really trying to scare me. I mean, I guess in a way they were, but and I'll say this, you'll notice that I said that was in August. I got sober October 7th. So September, I was still trying to figure it out. One last ditch effort. Um, and I'll tell you this, the day before I got sober, um, the thing that I did that night, like really in the grand scheme of things, I hurt somebody that I cared about, a boyfriend that I lived with. But I'll say this, like it wasn't the time that I was in jail for 5 days for my DWI. Oh, I got a second DWI in those 2 years, and stayed in jail for 5 days, um, or 6 days, in Dallas County. So the big one, the big scary one. And so yeah, I remember having a conversation with my dad after I got sober. And to be fair, this is like a year ago. um he was like, oh, I'm so glad that you went to jail, that was really your wake up call. And I was so shocked by this because I was like, no, it wasn't. I literally drank for 10 more months without fail. I mean, well, failures, but not enough, yet. but I woke up and I just had that like, spiritual sickness. Like when I describe, and I'm sure that a lot of you will identify this, when I got sober, I was just exhausted. Like I was exhausted in every single way that you could possibly imagine, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, like that complete exhaustion that even like the worst hangover you've ever had doesn't qualify. And I just said enough is enough. And like full transparency, it was either that I take my own life or this takes me. And for a lot of years it didn't feel like there was an alternative. So I was in this relationship. I stayed sober for 3 months. I had a boyfriend at the time that I moved in with because I'm impulsive and love. Um, and I stayed sober for 3 months because he was like watching me. And I thought if I could really just prove him wrong, I'd be good. And then I got to a point where him and I broke up, and I reached out to this girl, Meredith, who has passed away of cancer since this, but there's so much of my AA that like I I pray and thank her for often. And I came to the rooms, and I was well enough aware that I had no control over my life. And um with that being said, like step one was not that hard when I got there. I knew my life was unmanageable. I knew that I couldn't not drink. I knew that the next thing when he broke up with me, I was like, I will go drink, right? And then step two, I had a little bit of what I would deem as religious trauma, or so I convinced myself. I basically my grandfather was really big into the Catholic Church, and I have nothing against the Catholic Church. I'll just say that he was not a great representation. And so when I saw God on the walls and saw God everywhere, I was kind of like, okay, why I don't want his version of God. And so my first ever higher power that I got to form because of the book and what people tell me that I can do with my higher power was Bubba. And that was my higher power. And I still visualize what Bubba looks like. And you can ask me about that later. But then to step three, right? And I'll be honest, I still struggle with step three because of the fact that like I will still convince myself that I have control over things that I absolutely do not have control over. Acceptance today is not like I haven't wanted to take a drink since I was about 3 months sober, thank goodness, right? Or 3 months since I started the program. Um, but I can like, and I tell this story often, is I literally, it's not just alcohol I'm addicted to. I'm addicted to people, places, and things. Addicted to dopamine, right? And I've even gotten addicted to eyelash serum to the point that like I would go to meetings and my eyes were like red, and people like, and I would still go buy another one. And this happened. And I will say I did find the right one. So if you're interested, get with me. But but anyways, so step three, one thing that was really cool. And sorry, I'm kind of like speeding up. I see the time and I'm like, oh. Step three, my sponsor got to kind of simplify it for me. I had this experience in high school where I got to go on this 24-mile hike in Creede, Colorado, um, during this week. And when that happened, we got to do this peak thing. And it was, if anybody's familiar with Young Life in high school, it's like a Christian-based program that high schools sometimes do. That could also just be Texas, to be fair. But anyways, we had this opportunity to drop this rock off of this cliff. And I thought of that a lot with step three because I'm of the variety where sometimes I just have to visualize it. So sometimes like step three for me with things is I physically have to imagine. Hey, Devin, I physically have to imagine, getting this off of my chest or like literally dropping, things. And that has been kind of cool. And I still have to do that. Step four, I the first time I when I relapsed, I was on step four, right? And people talk about how scary step four is It's really not. Like, think of like homework that you don't want to do, but then you do it and you feel better. Like it's really kind of the scope of it. You know what I mean? Like, um, is it gonna cut me off? Sorry. Okay, okay. I promise I'll get through it. Um, and so, but this is what I'll say about step four. Do it thoroughly. Like, do it as thoroughly as you can. And in my experience, I didn't remember everything. You know, I've since gone through the steps multiple times, and I'll still call up my sponsor and say, "Hey, can I do a mini four step?" Depending, I mean, I still have my 10th step, so we'll say that, but depending on like how often it comes up and how big it is. But all the columns, look at your own fears. But the biggest thing that step four did for me was I needed to be able to like, I needed to be able to identify my own part in things. That is the number one thing I've gotten from step four and continue to get is like I play a part in every single situation. I'm the common denominator. This is not a Sims, game. Like this is, so that is a really important part. And I did find relief, and not everybody finds relief, but then I got to go to step five, right? And my sponsor is such a gem. I've had the same sponsor since I was about 3 months sober. Her name's Marty, and she wanted what I had. Or wait, she did well. I wanted what she had. That's the kicker. But she like very. I think even before we went through my four step, kind of told me a few things about her and her experience, which is really nice because she kind of warmed me up, and so when we were going through my fifth step, I felt more comfortable with her. And I mean, still to this day, she came over last week and I had hurt my back and she brought me over this thing. And not to say that every sponsor might do that. I don't want to set an expectation. I would, to be fair. But anyways, she like immediately broke something down for me and I just started bawling. Like that woman knows me more than maybe even my husband. I will also say this. This is important. I did date somebody in my first year. And the reason that that my sponsor told me not to, I have found out is because you do not know yourself. I did not know myself. Like, and I'll just speak for myself here. Did not know myself well enough as a sober human being. I got sober and I was like, I'm a baby. I don't know how to do my taxes. And then I'm like, yeah, let me jump into this relationship. Now, I will say I am married to this man. He is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm eternally grateful for him. He's also a part of TXSCYPAA. But in hindsight, I have much more respect for why my sponsor told me not to date in my first year. I just like I'm rebellious, I'm hard-headed. And that was an important thing. So we go on to 6 and 7. My sponsor wrote out my assets and my character defects. And I was really grateful for that. Trying to think. Anyways, yeah, I did my amends. I started sponsoring women. It's a beautiful life I live today that I'm very grateful for. So the topic that I was thinking about was actually over step four, naturally, if I didn't go over it enough. I'll read this and then I'd like to hear what anybody would say about if they haven't done the four step before, if they're currently on the four step, or what you got out of the four step. But I'll read this really quickly. On page 43 of the 12 and 12, step four, it says, we wish to look squarely in the unhappiness that has caused others and ourselves. By discovering what our emotional deformities are, we can move towards their correction. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment for us. Without a searching and fearless moral inventory, most of us have found that the faith which really works in daily living is still out of reach. And that's it.